Room 108. The hum of the laundry machines, a constant, low-grade insult. This family reunion. It was always a battlefield, but this year I was armed. They didn't know I owned the hotel. The Miramar, their gilded cage, was mine. A secret inheritance, courtesy of my grandfather, 6 months simmering. My heart hammered as Lucia, the family's son, soaked up the usual adoration. Me, a shadow, until Mom saw me. Her face, disappointment, etched in every line. I thought you wouldn't come, Carmen. The words, a paper cut. I smiled, a tight, brittle thing. Wouldn't miss it. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. This story is just getting started, and your support means the world. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, please hit subscribe and help me reach my first 1,000 subscribers. Okay, so the backstory. For years, I've been the family's artistic failure, the graphic designer, the one who wasted her potential. This reunion, a yearly reminder of my shortcomings. Roberto, Lucia's husband, scanned me like I was a clearance rack. Graphic design still a struggle? He sneered. Doesn't look too lucrative. If only they knew my struggle was a thriving international agency, pulling in serious revenue. But the real gut punch? This hotel, this opulent monument to their success, was mine. Grandfather always saw something in me they couldn't or wouldn't. The room assignments were announced. Lucia, presidential suite, naturally. Parents, executive. Cousins, deluxe. Carmen, Mom said, her voice like ice. Room 108. Next to the laundry. A ripple of glances. Pity. Amusement. Miguel, the manager, winced. Ma'am, perhaps another. Mom cut him off sharp. Carmen's simple. She doesn't need much. Miguel knew. We'd agreed to keep my ownership under wraps. It's fine, Miguel, I said, trying for nonchalance. Room 108 will be perfect. Or will it shatter me? Their eyes burned into my back as I walked to the elevator. Like a brand. Always gets the leftovers, Daniela whispered. The room was exactly as I remembered. Small, noisy, overlooking the service area. The view? A concrete wall and overflowing dumpsters. A single bed, like a lonely raft in a sea of resentment. I sat down, took a breath. I wasn't here to gloat, to rub their noses in it. I was here to understand. Why, after all this time, was I still the family's punching bag? That night, the welcome dinner. The best table, front and center for them. Me. Strategically placed behind a column, practically invisible. They ordered lobster and filet mignon. I ordered a salad. Can't afford anything better, Carmen? Dad asked, a cruel mix of pity and something else. We can treat you. The salad is fine, thank you. I said, my voice steady but inside crumbling. The conversation? Predictably, Lucia's achievements. Her promotion. Her new house in the right neighborhood. Our Lucia always knew what she wanted, Mom said, a pointed dagger. Not like Carmen, wasting her life. The head chef, Antonio, approached, a small bow. Is the salad to your liking, Miss Carmen? Delicious, Antonio. My family stared, confused. You know the chef? Lucia asked, her voice laced with suspicion. We've crossed paths, I said vaguely. I'd hired Antonio 3 months ago. The secret was a ticking time bomb. The night wore on, fueled by expensive wine. Each glass loosened their tongues, sharpened their barbs. The secret? It was a lead weight in my stomach. Should I reveal it? What would they do if they knew every insult, every humiliation, was happening on my dime? Miguel approached, his voice barely a whisper. Miss Carmen, an urgent matter. Roberto snorted. Did they run out of colored pencils again? I stood, ignoring him. Excuse me. In the private office, Miguel looked genuinely distressed. Miss, I can't keep watching this. You own this place. It's not right. I know, Miguel, I said, my voice flat. But I need to understand something first. A family wound, festering for decades, like a slow-acting poison. I looked out at the dark sea, a vast, indifferent expanse. Was I finally close to finding the source of their disdain? Back at the table, Javier was droning on about his new sports car, a midlife crisis on wheels. Elena, ever the inquisitor, zeroed in. What did that employee want, Carmen? Do you know him from somewhere? All eyes on me, like spotlights on a trapped animal. Just a mix-up with the reservation, I said, trying to sound casual. Typical, Lucia muttered, loud enough for me to hear. Always causing problems. Later, in the deserted lobby, the silence broken only by the gentle lapping of waves, Miguel offered tea. Your grandfather would be proud, he said quietly. He knew you'd be the one to care for his legacy. I managed a weak smile, a melancholic curve. He was the only one who saw something special in me. Sometimes, I wonder if he was wrong. Miguel shook his head, his eyes firm. You've done more in months than anyone. Don Ernesto wasn't mistaken. The next morning, at the breakfast buffet, the air thick with unspoken tension, staff greeted me with veiled respect. My family, oblivious, too busy piling their plates with smoked salmon and imported cheeses to notice. Carmen, is that all you're eating? Mom asked, scrutinizing my plate of fruit and yogurt like it was a personal affront. That's why you're so thin. You look sick. I'm perfectly healthy, Mom, I said, forcing a smile. I prefer something light. Roberto burst out laughing, a harsh, grating sound. Light or economical? I bet you calculate every penny. Laughter rippled through the table, each chuckle a tiny shard of glass. I focused on my breakfast, trying to block out the noise, the judgment. Not yet. The morning unfolded, a carefully orchestrated performance of family togetherness. A hotel tour, led by a beaming Miguel. Pool time, where Lucia reigned supreme. Spa treatments, the best reserved for the chosen ones. Sorry, no space for the premium massage, Mom said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. You'll have to settle for the basic one later. I later learned she'd canceled my reservation, deeming it a waste on Carmen. The sting was familiar, but it still burned. During lunch, the conversation, as always, circled back to Grandfather Ernesto's inheritance. I'll never understand why Dad sold the hotel, Mom lamented, her eyes scanning the opulent surroundings. His greatest pride. He must have received an irresistible offer, Dad replied, his voice a little too smooth. Lucia sighed dramatically. If it were still ours, we could stay for free. We could even give Carmen a decent room, she added, her words dripping with condescension. I suppressed a smile, a bitter taste in my mouth. If only they knew. That afternoon, while my parents and Lucia basked in the sun on a private yacht, I slipped into Grandfather's old office, now my private sanctuary. Miguel waited, a silent sentinel, with a box of documents. What you asked for, Miss Carmen. These were Grandfather's personal papers, the key to unlocking a lifetime of family secrets. Letters, photographs, diaries, a yellowed envelope, brittle with age, dated 15 years ago. A letter from Mom to Grandfather. The words hit me like a physical blow. Dad, Carmen isn't like us. She never was. If you keep treating her as your favorite, you'll only hurt her. She doesn't have what it takes. Lucia should inherit the hotel. My hands trembled, the paper shaking in my grasp. More letters followed, a relentless campaign spanning years. Mom, systematically trying to convince Grandfather I was undeserving, detailing my supposed failures, my lack of ambition. A handwritten note from Grandfather, never sent, a beacon of hope in the darkness, responded. Isabel, it saddens me to see how you treat your own daughter. Carmen has a spirit and intelligence you can't see. Someday, you'll all realize the mistake you've made. It wasn't just envy, it was a calculated dismantling of my self-worth, orchestrated by my own mother. Then something even more insidious. My father and Roberto had tried to manipulate Grandfather into selling them the hotel at a drastically reduced price, shortly before his death. Their plan had failed, thwarted by Grandfather's suspicion and his ultimate decision to leave the hotel to me. A knock. Daniela. Carmen, what are you doing here? This area is restricted. Miguel stepped forward, a protective shield. The young lady was looking for information about the hotel. Daniela narrowed her eyes, her gaze sharp and assessing. Strange they let you in. They wouldn't even let us take a look. Maybe I'm not as insignificant as everyone thinks, I replied, holding her gaze, refusing to back down. Something flickered in her eyes, a flicker of doubt. You were always Grandfather's favorite, she said slowly, her voice almost a whisper. We all knew it, but no one would admit it. After she left, I knew my secret was living on borrowed time. The family would start to suspect. I would have to make a choice. Continue enduring their petty cruelties, or reveal the truth and risk shattering everything. That night, the gala dinner. The storm that had been brewing since my arrival was about to unleash its full fury. Okay, buckle up, because this is where the fireworks begin. The gala dinner. The culmination of the family reunion, a glittering spectacle of wealth and privilege. The hotel's ballroom, transformed into a fairy tale landscape of fresh flowers, shimmering candles, and crystal chandeliers. I arrived late, deliberately, wearing a simple but elegant black dress, a creation of my own design, a subtle act of defiance. Finally, Mom said, her voice tight with irritation. We were about to order without you. I took my place at the table, again relegated to the periphery, the least desirable spot. Roberto, already half in the bag, was boasting about his latest real estate conquests, his voice booming across the room. I could even buy a hotel like this someday, he declared, puffing out his chest. Lucia smiled proudly, her eyes shining with admiration. My husband has business vision. Unlike some. Dad raised his glass, his face flushed with pride. To Roberto and Lucia, the true pride of this family. Everyone toasted, their glasses clinking in a chorus of self-congratulation. I kept my glass firmly on the table, the champagne untouched. During the first course, as the waiters glided silently between the tables, Daniela watched me, her gaze intense, unreadable. Finally, she broke the silence. Carmen, I saw you in the private office today. You seemed very comfortable. A sudden hush fell over the table, the clatter of silverware replaced by an oppressive silence. All eyes turned to me, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. What were you doing in restricted areas? Dad asked, his brow furrowed. I took a sip of water, trying to appear calm, collected. Investigating some things about the hotel. Why would you do that? Mom asked, her voice sharp. It's not like you're going to buy one. Roberto let out a thunderous laugh, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed through the room. Carmen owning a hotel? That's hilarious. She can't even afford a decent room. It was then that Miguel approached our table, his face carefully neutral, carrying a bottle of Dom Perignon, its golden bubbles shimmering in the candlelight. Miss Carmen, he said, his voice clear and respectful. The champagne you requested for your family. Mom blinked, confusion clouding her features. We didn't order any champagne. It's complimentary, Miguel said, his eyes meeting mine for a brief, knowing moment, from me. From you. Lucia almost choked, her face turning a shade of puce. How could you afford a bottle that probably costs more than your monthly rent? Miguel served the champagne, his movements precise and elegant, as if he were performing a sacred ritual. The tension at the table was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. There are many things you don't know about me, I said simply, my voice low but clear, cutting through the silence like a shard of ice. Dad looked at me, his eyes narrowed, a flicker of unease in their depths. What are you talking about, Carmen? If you have something to say it. I contemplated my options, weighing the potential consequences of each choice. I could reveal my secret now, expose their hypocrisy, humiliate them as they had humiliated me for years. Revenge would be sweet, a long-awaited dessert. But as I observed their faces, their expressions a mixture of arrogance, entitlement, and thinly veiled contempt, something shifted inside me. I didn't want to become like them, consumed by bitterness and resentment. I just wanted to be seen, to be valued, to be loved. I just wanted to make a toast, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, to celebrate that we're together as a family despite everything. The surprise on their faces was almost comical. They didn't expect generosity from me, not after the way they had treated me. The dinner continued, but the atmosphere had subtly changed. Daniela watched me with a new kind of curiosity, her eyes searching, questioning. During dessert, as the waiters presented a lavish display of pastries and chocolates, Lucia brought up grandfather's inheritance, her voice tinged with bitterness. I never understood why grandfather sold the hotel in secret, she said, her gaze sweeping across the room, taking in the opulent surroundings. It was the family patrimony. Maybe because he knew some would try to take advantage. I replied, my eyes meeting Dad's and Roberto's, a silent challenge. Roberto bristled, his face flushed with anger. What are you insinuating? Nothing, I said calmly, my voice deceptively soft. Just that grandfather was more astute than everyone thought. Dad looked at me, his expression a mixture of suspicion and nervousness. Carmen, if you know something about the hotel sale, you should share it with the family now. I'm part of the family now, I asked, my voice laced with irony. How curious. A few hours ago, I was the poor relative who didn't even deserve a decent room. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table, broken only by the clinking of silverware. Mom tried to change the subject, but I pressed on, unable to stop myself. You know, grandfather told me many things, I said, my voice gaining strength with each word. I spent hours with him, while you were busy with your important lives. He told me about his plans for the hotel, about what he wanted for his legacy. And what did he say? Lucia asked, unable to hide her curiosity, her voice tight with anticipation. He told me that a family business is like a mirror, I said, pausing for effect, letting my words sink in. It reflects the values of those who run it, and that you always have to be careful with deceptive appearances. Roberto slammed his fist on the table, the force of the blow rattling the silverware. Enough riddles, he shouted, his face contorted with anger. If you have something to say it clearly. At that moment, as if on cue, the hotel's general manager, Javier, approached our table, his presence radiating authority and respect. Excuse the interruption, he said, his voice smooth and professional. I just wanted to make sure everything was to your liking, especially for you, Miss Carmen. My family observed uncomfortably the preferential treatment I was receiving, their faces a mixture of confusion and resentment. Everything is perfect, Javier, thank you. I replied with a warm smile, my eyes meeting his. Why the hell do they treat you like you're someone important? Dad demanded to know, his voice laced with anger and frustration. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. I hadn't planned to reveal my secret tonight, but the situation was spiraling out of control. I had to make a decision, and I had to make it now. Because they know my work, I replied, my voice clear and unwavering. They simply respect what I do. Drawing logos? Roberto mocked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I design corporate identity for international companies. I corrected, my voice firm. My agency has clients on 3 continents and 30 employees. Last year, our revenue exceeded $3 million. The surprise on their faces was immediate, almost comical. Mom almost dropped her glass, her eyes wide with disbelief. You're lying, Lucia accused, her voice shrill. If you were so successful, you would have bragged about it. Unlike some, I don't need constant validation from others, I replied, my voice calm but firm. And there's a difference between humility and allowing myself to be treated like trash. If you're so successful, why did you accept staying in that horrible room? Mom asked, her voice genuinely confused, as if she couldn't comprehend my actions. Because I wanted to see how far you would take it, I replied honestly, my voice laced with a hint of bitterness. I wanted to understand if there was any limit to the contempt you feel for me. My words fell like slabs of ice on the table, chilling the air and silencing the room. For the first time, I saw shame on some of their faces, a flicker of recognition in their eyes. Not on all, but it was a start. Carmen, Dad began, his voice hesitant, uncertain, but I interrupted him, cutting him off before he could offer a hollow apology. I'm not finished, I said firmly, my voice ringing with a newfound strength. For years, I endured your comments, your pitying looks, your constant contempt. All because I didn't follow the path you considered appropriate, because I chose to create instead of destroy, to build instead of manipulate. My hands were shaking, but my voice remained steady, unwavering. It was as if decades of silence had finally found their voice, a voice that could no longer be silenced. Grandfather taught me that a person's value isn't in what they possess or the appearances they maintain, but in how they treat others. I continued, my eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. He saw something in me that you could never see, because you were too busy comparing me to your narrow-minded idea of success. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. I could see a kaleidoscope of emotions crossing their faces. Disbelief, shame, confusion, and in some cases, the beginning of an uncomfortable realization. If this is true, Dad finally said, his voice barely a whisper, why did you never say anything? Why did you let us treat you this way? Would you have listened? I asked, my voice laced with a hint of bitterness. Or would you have found another way to minimize my achievements, to dismiss my dreams? He had no answer for that. We all knew the truth. The dinner ended in an uncomfortable silence, the remnants of the lavish meal untouched. As the others retired to their luxurious suites, their faces etched with a mixture of shock and disbelief, Daniela stayed behind, lingering near the table. She sat down beside me, her eyes searching mine. I always knew you were different, she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. Grandfather used to tell me to watch you, to learn from you. I never understood why until now. Our eyes met in a moment of mutual understanding, a shared recognition of the family dynamics that had shaped our lives. Carmen, she continued, her voice hesitant, there's something more, isn't there? Something about this hotel and grandfather that you haven't said. I nodded slowly, a sense of inevitability washing over me. Yes, I said, my voice barely audible. And tomorrow, everyone will know. The next morning dawned with unusual clarity, the sky a brilliant shade of blue, the sea sparkling like 1,000 diamonds. From my modest room next to the laundry, I could hear the familiar hum of the machines, a constant reminder of my place in the family hierarchy. But today, everything was about to change. I dressed carefully, choosing an ivory-tailored suit, a power outfit I reserved for special occasions. Today would undoubtedly be an occasion, a day none of us would ever forget. During breakfast, the dynamics had subtly shifted. My family watched me with a mixture of confusion and curiosity, their eyes darting nervously in my direction. The mockery had ceased, replaced by an uncomfortable silence and furtive glances. My revelation the night before had shaken the foundations of the family, but they still didn't know the whole truth. Mom was the first to attempt to bridge the gap, her voice tentative, uncertain. "Carmen, dear," she said, forcing a smile, "we didn't know your business was doing so well. You should have told us." "I tried, Mom, for years," I replied, my voice calm, without a trace of bitterness. "Every time I mentioned a new client or an important project, you changed the subject to talk about Lucia's achievements." My sister had the decency to blush, her face turning a delicate shade of pink. "Well, the important thing is that now we know," Dad intervened, adopting a conciliatory tone he had never used with me before. "We're proud of you, of course." Roberto, however, remained skeptical, his arms crossed, his expression guarded. $3 million in annual revenue? That's impressive, if it's true, he commented, emphasizing the last part, his voice dripping with suspicion. "Although revenue isn't the same as profit, of course. My profit margin last year was 28% after taxes," I replied, refusing to be baited, my voice calm and even. His expression transformed into a mixture of surprise and something that looked almost like respect. At 10 a.m. sharp, Miguel approached our table, his presence radiating quiet authority. "Miss Carmen," he said, his voice clear and professional, "everything is ready for the meeting you requested." My family looked at me, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm. "I organized a small presentation about the hotel's history," I explained, standing up, my heart pounding in my chest. "I thought it would interest you, considering how important it was to grandfather." We headed to the main conference room, an elegant space with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the ocean. Inside, to my surprise, wasn't just the hotel's management team, but also an older, distinguished-looking man I recognized immediately. Arturo Mendez, my grandfather's longtime lawyer. "What does this mean, Carmen?" Dad asked, his voice laced with alarm. "Please take your seats," I indicated, pointing to the front row of chairs. Once everyone was seated, I positioned myself in front of them, my hands trembling slightly, but my voice remaining steady. "Thank you all for coming. As you know, this hotel was the crown jewel of Grandfather Ernesto's businesses. He built it from scratch, converting a small inn into one of the most prestigious establishments on the coast." I activated the projector, showing old photographs of the hotel in its early days, black and white images of Grandfather, young and full of ambition, overseeing the construction, greeting guests, his face beaming with pride. My family watched, their faces a mixture of nostalgia and confusion, trying to decipher the purpose of this unexpected presentation. "What you may not know," I continued, my voice gaining strength with each word, "is what really happened to the hotel after his death." Mom tensed visibly, her hands clenching in her lap. "Grandfather sold the hotel before dying. We never knew to whom." "That's not entirely accurate," Lawyer Mendez intervened, standing beside me, his presence adding weight to my words. "Don Ernesto didn't sell the hotel. He transferred it to a trust." "A trust?" Dad repeated, his brow furrowed, his voice laced with suspicion. "Why weren't we informed?" "Because it wasn't relevant to you," Mendez replied with professional coldness, his gaze unwavering. "The trust had a single beneficiary." All eyes turned to me, their expressions a mixture of shock, disbelief, and dawning realization. I could see the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place in their minds, the truth slowly emerging from the shadows. "It can't be," Lucia whispered, her voice barely audible, her face pale. I nodded slowly, confirming their worst fears. "Grandfather left me the hotel. I've been the owner for 6 months." The silence that followed was absolute, as if even the air had stopped moving, holding its breath in anticipation. The expressions on their faces ranged from disbelief to indignation, passing through the deepest shock and resentment. Roberto was the first to recover his voice, his face red with anger, his eyes blazing with fury. "This is absurd," he shouted, his voice echoing through the room. "Why would he leave it to you? Precisely you? His most valuable possession." "That's an excellent question," I replied, my voice calm and measured, looking directly at my parents. "And I think Mom might have some idea." Mom paled instantly, her eyes widening in alarm. "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her voice trembling. "I found your letters, Mom," I said, my voice unwavering. "The ones you wrote to Grandfather, trying to convince him that I didn't deserve his attention or his inheritance." Several gasps were heard in the room, the sound of shock and disbelief rippling through the audience. Mom seemed to have shrunk in her chair, her shoulders slumped, her face etched with shame. "I also found something else," I continued, signaling Miguel, who delivered a folder to each family member, his movements precise and efficient. "The documents confirming that Dad and Roberto tried to manipulate Grandfather into selling them the hotel at a reduced price, shortly before his death." Dad opened the folder with trembling hands, his face turning ashen as he scanned the contents. Inside were copies of emails, fraudulent purchase proposals, and false appraisals that deliberately underestimated the hotel's value, all damning evidence of their betrayal. This is taken out of context," he stammered, his voice barely audible, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "No, it's not," Lawyer Mendez intervened, his voice firm and unwavering. "Don Ernesto showed me these documents. That's when he decided to modify his will and leave the hotel in trust to Carmen, the only person he truly trusted to preserve his legacy." Roberto stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, his face contorted with anger. "This is a conspiracy," he shouted, his voice shaking with rage. "You certainly manipulated the old man or the lawyer. You don't have what it takes to run a business like this. The results suggest otherwise," I replied calmly, my voice unwavering, refusing to be intimidated. "In the 6 months since I took control, the hotel's revenue has increased by 18%, customer satisfaction has improved, and we've been nominated for 2 Hospitality Excellence Awards." Miguel nodded in confirmation, his eyes meeting mine with a look of pride and respect. The management team present showed expressions of support, their faces reflecting a mixture of loyalty and admiration. Mom seemed genuinely confused, her eyes searching mine, her voice laced with desperation. "If you're the owner," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "why did you accept staying in that horrible room? Why did you allow us to treat you like that?" It was the question I'd been waiting for, the question that had haunted me for years, the question that held the key to unlocking the secrets of our dysfunctional family. "It was the question I'd been waiting for," I replied, feeling the emotion finally break through the carefully constructed walls I had built around my heart, my voice trembling slightly. "Because I needed to understand," I continued, my voice gaining strength with each word. "I needed to comprehend if you really saw me as worthless, or if there was some deeper reason for your contempt." The tears threatened to flow, blurring my vision, but I stayed strong, refusing to break down in front of them. "And what I discovered," I said, my voice laced with a hint of bitterness, "was even more painful than I imagined. It's not that you believed I had no value. It's that you feared what would happen if others saw my value, especially Grandfather." Mom lowered her gaze, unable to sustain mine, her face etched with shame and regret. "The letters show it clearly, Mom," I continued, my voice unwavering. "You couldn't stand that Grandfather loved me. You couldn't accept that he saw something special in me. Why? What did I do to deserve this?" The silence that followed was broken by a muffled sob, a sound of deep anguish that seemed to echo through the room. It was Mom, her shoulders shaking, her face buried in her hands, her body racked with sobs. She seemed to have collapsed under the weight of decades of secrets, the burden of her own insecurities finally crushing her. "You were just like him," she finally murmured, her voice broken by emotion, her words barely audible. "You had the same look, the same way of seeing the world. When you were little, he used to say you were his living image, that you had his entrepreneurial spirit." She paused, breathing shakily, her voice laced with a mixture of pain and regret. "And I was always a disappointment to him. I was never smart enough, ambitious enough. When you appeared with your creativity and determination, I saw how his eyes lit up when talking to you, in a way they never did with me. The revelation fell like a bomb in the room, shattering the carefully constructed facade of our family, exposing the raw, festering wounds that had been hidden for so long. Decades of resentment, of maternal jealousy, of a competition I never knew we were having, all lay bare in that single, devastating confession. "So you decided to make sure I never shone," I concluded, feeling a mixture of understanding and pain wash over me, the years of hurt and resentment finally finding a voice. "You convinced the whole family that I was less, that my dreams weren't worth it." Mom didn't deny it, she couldn't, the truth etched on her face, a testament to her guilt. "And you," I addressed Dad, turning to him, my voice laced with a hint of accusation. "You saw a business opportunity. If I stayed marginalized from the family, I wouldn't be a threat to your plans with the hotel." Dad seemed to have aged 10 years in the last few minutes, his face etched with lines of worry and regret. Lucia, meanwhile, remained seated, silent, her face unreadable, her eyes wide with shock, apparently processing everything she had just discovered about our family dynamics, the hidden currents of resentment and jealousy that had shaped our lives. It was then that I made the most important decision of all, a decision that would determine the future of our family, a decision that would either perpetuate the cycle of pain and resentment or break it forever. "Despite everything," I said, finally breaking the dense silence that had fallen over the room, my voice clear and unwavering, "I'm still part of this family." My words seemed to float in the air, unexpected and disconcerting for everyone present, their faces reflecting a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "We're not here for a settling of accounts," I continued, my voice gaining strength with each word, my heart filled with a sense of purpose. "I could have humiliated you from the beginning, expelled you from the hotel, or treated you as you treated me, but that would only perpetuate the cycle of resentment that has poisoned this family for too long." Mom looked at me, her eyes red and swollen, a mixture of shame and amazement on her face. "When Grandfather left me this hotel," I said, my voice filled with emotion, "I didn't completely understand why he did it. Now I know. It wasn't just about the business, it was about giving us a chance to heal." I walked to the large window that dominated the room, contemplating the sea that stretched before us, a vast, indifferent expanse that had witnessed countless generations of our family, their triumphs and their tragedies. The same sea my grandfather had contemplated every morning from his office. The sea that had inspired him, comforted him, and reminded him of the enduring power of nature. "Grandfather left something else in the trust," I announced, turning back to face my family, my voice filled with a newfound sense of hope. "A letter that should be delivered to the family 6 months after I took possession of the hotel. That is today." Lawyer Mendez nodded, his face solemn, and took an envelope from his briefcase, its paper yellowed with age, its seal unbroken. He handed it to me with a respectful bow. "This is Don Ernesto's last wish," he explained, his voice filled with emotion. Beyond the legal aspects, he specifically requested that it be read in the presence of the entire family. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope, my heart pounding in my chest. I extracted the pages, written in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting, the familiar script bringing a wave of memories flooding back, the scent of his pipe tobacco, the warmth of his smile, the wisdom of his words. I began reading aloud, my voice filled with emotion, my words echoing through the silent room, carrying the weight of the past and the promise of the future. "Dear family," I read, my voice faltering slightly. "If you are hearing these words, it means Carmen has assumed her role as owner of Hotel Miramar, and the time has come for you to know my true reasons. This hotel represents my legacy, but a legacy is not just walls and business. A legacy is also the values we transmit to the generations that follow us." For years, I watched sadly as our family fragmented. I saw the contempt for Carmen, the person who, ironically, most resembles me in spirit and vision. Isabel, my dear daughter, always tried to prove her worth to me by competing with her own daughter. It wasn't necessary. I loved her for who she was, not for who she believed she should be to impress me. Roberto and Lucia built their lives on appearances and superficial ambitions. True success is not measured in properties or status, but in the integrity with which we live. I left the hotel to Carmen not only because I trust her ability to manage it, but because I trust her heart to heal our family's wounds. My last wish is that you use this revelation as an opportunity to reflect, to acknowledge past mistakes, and to build a future where mutual respect replaces contempt, where family love is stronger than individual ambitions. The hotel now legally belongs to Carmen, but spiritually belongs to all of you, if you're willing to build a new family dynamic based on respect and acceptance. With eternal love, Ernesto. When I finished reading, several people in the room, including the hotel staff, had tears in their eyes, their faces reflecting a mixture of sadness, hope, and a profound sense of understanding. The silence that followed was charged with emotion, with realization, with truths denied for too long. Mom was the first to speak, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes filled with tears. "All this time," she murmured, her voice trembling, "all this time competing with my own daughter, trying to prove something to a father who already loved me." She stood slowly, her movements hesitant, and to my surprise approached me, her face etched with remorse. With a voice broken by emotion, she said, "Carmen, I don't know if you can ever forgive me. I was a terrible mother, blinded by my own insecurities." I saw in her eyes something I had never seen before: genuine recognition, vulnerability, and the beginning of deep regret. My own tears surfaced, years of longing for the maternal love I never received manifesting in that moment of shared vulnerability. "That's all I ever wanted, Mom," I replied softly, my voice choked with emotion, reaching out to take her hands in mine. Dad joined us, his face etched with lines of regret, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. "Your grandfather was right," he admitted, almost to himself, his voice barely audible. "I built my whole life trying to impress others, forgetting what really matters." Lucia, meanwhile, remained seated, silent, her face unreadable, her eyes wide with shock, apparently still processing everything she had just discovered about our family dynamics. Finally, she stood and walked towards me, her movements hesitant, her expression a mixture of sadness and acceptance. "I never understood why grandfather preferred you," she said slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "Now I see. While I sought his approval, you sought his wisdom. While I wanted his money, you wanted his legacy." There was no hostility in her voice, just a sad acceptance of the truth. Roberto, however, didn't seem moved by the emotional outpouring, his face remaining hard and unyielding. He stood abruptly, his face red with indignation, his eyes blazing with anger. "And I suppose now we should feel guilty? That we should congratulate you for inheriting an empire you didn't build." He looked at Lucia, expecting her support, but she remained by my side, her hand resting gently on my arm. "Roberto," I said calmly, my voice unwavering, "the hotel is legally mine. That won't change. But what we do from here as a family depends on all of us." Lawyer Mendez cleared his throat discreetly, breaking the tense silence. "Actually," he said, his voice professional and measured, "there's an additional caudal that we haven't discussed yet." We all turned to him, surprised, our faces reflecting a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Don Ernesto established that, at Carmen's discretion, and solely at her discretion, she could assign minority stakes in the hotel to other family members, provided they demonstrated commitment to the values he defended. The revelation fell like a bomb, shattering the fragile peace that had begun to emerge, sending shockwaves of hope and fear through the room. My family now looked at me with a mixture of hope and apprehension, their faces reflecting a desperate desire for redemption. "I'm not seeking servility in exchange for shares," I clarified, my voice firm, my eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. "What grandfather wanted was genuine reconciliation, not motivated by economic interest." "What do you propose then?" Dad asked, his voice filled with a genuine desire to understand, a tone suggesting he was really willing to listen to change. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come, the opportunity to transform pain into something constructive, to build a future based on respect and acceptance. "I propose that we acknowledge the truth," I said, my voice clear and unwavering, "that we're a dysfunctional family that has caused real harm to its members. We can't erase the past, but we can decide how our future will be." I paused, looking each one in the eyes, my gaze unwavering, my voice filled with conviction. "The hotel will continue under my direction, but I'm willing to create a family council where everyone has a voice, not for operational decisions, but to ensure grandfather's legacy endures, in philanthropic works, in community help, in the values he defended." "And the shares?" Roberto asked, his voice still skeptical, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and suspicion. "They'll be earned over time," I replied firmly, my voice unwavering. "Not with flattery to me, but with actions that demonstrate you truly understood grandfather's message. Mom approached me, her face etched with remorse, her eyes filled with tears. With some hesitation, she took my hands in hers, her touch tentative, uncertain. "I don't deserve a second chance," she said, her voice trembling, her tears running down her cheeks. "But if you're willing to give me one, I promise I'll do everything possible to be the mother I should have been from the beginning." I felt my own tears surfacing. Years of longing for the maternal love I never received manifesting in that moment of shared vulnerability. The pain of the past slowly giving way to the hope of the future. "That's all I ever wanted, Mom," I replied softly, my voice choked with emotion, squeezing her hands gently. Dad joined us, his face etched with lines of regret, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and hope, his presence offering a silent apology for the years of neglect and indifference. Lucia followed, her face reflecting a mixture of sadness and acceptance, her eyes filled with a newfound understanding of our family dynamics. Roberto, however, remained distant, observing the scene with a mixture of confusion and resentment, his arms crossed, his face unyielding. "I need time to process all this," he said finally, his voice hard and unyielding, heading towards the door, his departure leaving a void in the room. "Take all the time you need," I replied, my voice calm and measured. "The door will be open when you're ready." After Roberto left, the atmosphere in the room changed, the tension slowly dissipating, the air becoming lighter, as if an invisible weight had been lifted, allowing us to breathe freely for the first time in decades. The hotel staff, who had witnessed the entire scene, seemed deeply moved, their faces reflecting a mixture of relief and hope. Miguel discreetly began indicating they should leave us alone, allowing us to have this moment of family reconciliation in private. When we were left with just us and Lawyer Mendez, Lucia spoke, her voice hesitant, her eyes searching mine. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. "How do we begin to repair so much damage?" With honesty, I replied, my voice firm, my eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. "Grandfather used to say that family wounds only heal when they're exposed to air. We've kept this resentment in darkness for too long." Dad nodded slowly, his face etched with lines of regret, his eyes filled with a newfound understanding. "You have his wisdom, Carmen," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "You always have." Mendez stood up, collecting his briefcase, his face reflecting a mixture of satisfaction and relief. "My work here is finished," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Don Ernesto would be proud of how you handled this, Carmen." As he headed towards the door, he paused, turning back to face me, his eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief. "By the way," he said, his voice casual, "there's an additional box of your grandfather's personal documents in my office. He mentioned you would find special interest in his diaries from the years he built the hotel." After Mendez left, my family and I remained in the room, enveloped in a silence that, for the first time, wasn't uncomfortable, but contemplative, a silence filled with the promise of healing and the hope of a brighter future. "I never asked you about your business," Mom said suddenly, breaking the silence, her voice filled with a newfound curiosity. $3 million in revenue, 30 employees. You must be very good at what you do." I smiled slightly, a genuine smile that reached my eyes, a smile that reflected the years of hard work and dedication that had gone into building my business. "I am," I replied, my voice filled with confidence, "and I'd love to show you my work someday." "I'd like that," she replied, her voice filled with a sincerity I'd never heard in her voice before, her eyes reflecting a genuine desire to connect, to understand. Lucia, always practical, intervened, her voice filled with a hint of concern. "So what happens with the rest of the family weekend?" she asked. "Do we continue with the planned activities?" I reflected for a moment, considering the implications of each choice, the need to balance the desire for healing with the reality of our complex family dynamics. "I think so," I said finally, my voice filled with a newfound sense of purpose, but with some changes. "To start, I'm going to move to the suite that corresponds to me as owner." "And what do we do about Roberto?" Dad asked, his voice filled with concern, his eyes reflecting a mixture of worry and uncertainty. "Well," I replied, my voice calm and measured, "we give him space. Some need more time than others to accept the truth." That night, as the hotel staff transferred my belongings to the hotel's main suite, the opulent surroundings a stark contrast to the modest room I had occupied just hours before, I felt a strange mixture of emotions, a complex tapestry of victory, relief, and a lingering sense of unease. Victory, yes, but not the petty victory of revenge, but the deeper, more meaningful victory of having broken a toxic cycle, of having given my family a chance to heal. From the suite's terrace, overlooking the vast expanse of the ocean, the salty wind caressing my face, bringing with it the aroma of new possibilities, I contemplated the same sea my grandfather had loved, the sea that had witnessed countless generations of our family, their triumphs and their tragedies. "You were right, grandfather," I murmured to the wind, my voice filled with emotion. "True power isn't in humiliating those who hurt us, but in giving them the opportunity to change." At that moment, I remembered the words my grandfather used to say, his voice filled with wisdom and compassion. "A hotel is like a family, Carmen. Each room is different. Each guest brings their own story. The secret is making everyone feel valued, not despite their differences, but because of them." For the first time in my life, I felt our family had the opportunity to become the kind of hotel my grandfather envisioned. A place where each person could find their space, their voice, their purpose, without losing the sense of belonging to the whole. The road would be long and probably difficult. Some wounds would take years to heal completely, if they ever healed at all. But we had taken the first step, perhaps the most important one. We had looked truth in the eyes and decided not to look away. 1 year has passed since that revealing family reunion, a year filled with challenges, triumphs, and a profound sense of transformation. Hotel Miramar thrives under my direction, its reputation enhanced by the changes grandfather would have approved. A scholarship program for young people from the local community, rooms adapted for people with disabilities, and a firm commitment to sustainability. My relationship with my family has evolved in ways I never imagined possible. The wounds of the past slowly healing, the bonds of love strengthening with each passing day. Mom and I have a weekly lunch meeting, a ritual that allows us to slowly rebuild our relationship, to bridge the gap created by years of resentment and misunderstanding. She no longer seeks to compete with me, but to truly know me, to understand my dreams and my aspirations. Sometimes, when we talk about design or business, I see in her eyes a glimmer of true maternal pride, a reflection of the love that had been buried for so long. Lucia was the biggest surprise, her transformation the most profound. After reflecting on her life and her values, she decided to return to university to study social work, her desire to make a meaningful contribution to the world outweighing her ambition for wealth and status. "I want to build something meaningful on my own merits," she told me, her eyes shining with a newfound sense of purpose. Her transformation has been profound and genuine, her actions speaking louder than words. Dad found an unexpected purpose in the hotel's community program, where he now coordinates activities for young entrepreneurs, sharing his knowledge and experience with the next generation of business leaders. He says that teaching them what he learned, including his mistakes, gives him a sense of purpose that money and status never provided, a sense of fulfillment that had been missing from his life for so long. Roberto took 6 months to speak to me again, his pride wounded, his ego bruised. When he finally did, it was to ask me for a job opportunity, not a free steak, a sign that he was finally willing to earn his place in the family. He now runs the hotel's expansion department, where his ambition, properly channeled, is proving valuable, his skills and experience contributing to the hotel's continued success. Room 108, the small, noisy room next to the laundry where they housed me that first day, has been transformed into a small museum that tells the story of the hotel and its founder, a tribute to grandfather's legacy and a reminder of the importance of family values. At the end of the tour, visitors find grandfather's letter framed on the wall, a powerful reminder that family businesses are above all about values and legacy, about building bridges instead of walls, about creating a sense of belonging for everyone. Every day, when I walk through the corridors of this hotel, which is both my inheritance and my responsibility, I feel grandfather's presence guiding me, his spirit watching over me, his wisdom inspiring me. I didn't choose to reveal my secret out of revenge, but for the possibility of healing it offered, for the chance to build a better future for my family. And although the path hasn't been easy, the family we're building now is stronger and more authentic than the one we pretended to be, a testament to the power of forgiveness, the importance of honesty, and the enduring strength of family love. As the sign at the hotel entrance says, "We don't build walls, but bridges." We don't offer rooms, but homes. That's the true secret of Hotel Miramar, and the most valuable legacy my grandfather left me. There are stories that aren't just stories, they're mirrors of life, reflecting our hopes, our fears, and our shared humanity. If this one moved you, help us continue telling others that also deserve to be heard. Become a member, join us, and help us spread the message of hope and healing. Thank you very much, and have an excellent day. And now, I'd love to hear from you. What's one thing you've learned about family from this story? Let me know in the comments below.